Okay, hi guys, thank you for coming to this presentation today. So first I would like to thank the committee members of the Professional Development Committee, the Office of the Dean, and also the Student Governing Council to bring here Heather and Sony to talk about copyright and plagiarism. Okay, so thank you. So Heather, we start with the presentation.
See if I can get this hooked on me. Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay, is that all right? Okay. All right, so thank you to the Professional Development Committee for asking me to come, and thank you all for attending, and I hope you're enjoying lunch. So just a couple things I want to note before I get started is that copyright is a very large and very complex topic. So I've boiled it down. We're going to get a very high-level overview today. We're not going to get down into the weeds of it. If you have specific questions about something that you're working on in particular, feel free to contact me after, and we could meet to discuss it in more detail and look at your exact situation. Additionally, small disclaimer, I'm a librarian, not a lawyer, okay? So none of this is legal advice, okay? That's my disclaimer. So let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to do today is we'll talk about plagiarism briefly so we can move on to copyright. I think plagiarism is probably a little bit more familiar to most people. And we'll talk about reasons for citing your sources. We'll differentiate between plagiarism and copyright. Those things are talked about a lot together, and it's not always clear what the differences are between them. And we'll look at the exclusive rights that copyright holders have over their work. We'll also look at the limitations of those exclusive rights. There are limitations written into copyright law. We'll talk about fair use, which many of you probably heard about, and the 4 factors that go along with it. And along the way, we'll look at different places where you can find images for your work that you can use in a variety of ways. So before I get started any further with the presentation, I just want to show you, since I know you're trying to eat your lunch, and you may not feel like you can take a lot of notes right now and try to scroll anything down, there are some online resources I want to point you to that will link you out to a lot of the things I'm going to show you today. If you come to the Dykes Library homepage, come down the quick links to the research guides section. In this section, there is a guide on plagiarism. And this gives you a lot more in-depth information on plagiarism. So if it's a new concept to you, you're not sure about it, this would be a good place to go. There's links to videos and even a game. It's kind of fun. This is a good source to look at. And then another source is we have a guide for images. Images analysis in the health sciences right here. And I'll be looking at some of these resources today, but they're all right here so you can link out to them and not have to worry about trying to jot down the URLs or anything while you're eating. So also at the bottom of this guide, there's a link to the KUMC copyright policy that applies to all of us. So you can look at that on your own if you'd like. And I've also put a link in here for the Copyright Resources Guide from the main campus in Lawrence. They have a really helpful guide that has lots of information. A little later in the presentation, I'm going to talk about a 4-factor checklist that goes along with fair use. There are checklists linked on that KU guide. Be a good resource to find lots more information about copyright. Okay, so I just wanted to let you know that. So let's jump back in here. And, okay. So to start with, a simple definition, plagiarism is the act of using another person's words or ideas without giving credit to that person. So we've got a little bandit here. Don't be a bandit. Don't steal things without giving credit to other people. And so if you want to avoid plagiarism, the first question you might have is, when do I need to cite my sources? How do I know when to cite things? And there's sort of 2 situations in which you need to do that. The first is if you're borrowing the ideas of another person, you need to give credit to those ideas. They might come from a book or a journal article. Those are the typical places that we think of. But they could come from lots of other sources. All the channels of information that we all consume information from every single day could be sources of those ideas. So it might be a video, it might be a lecture, it might be a Facebook post or a tweet. Could be on a myriad of websites. So there's lots of different places where those ideas could be coming from. The other thing you need to credit is the expression of the idea. If you're using someone's exact expression of their ideas, you need to give credit for that. So typically what we think of is a direct quote. So if you're borrowing someone's language verbatim, you need to put that in quotation marks and indicate to your audience that I didn't write this myself, I'm borrowing it. But that expression doesn't have to be text. It could also be a video clip or a chart or a table. If you're borrowing those things, then you need to indicate to your audience that I didn't create this table, I'm borrowing it from someone else. So then the next question is, okay, I know when to cite, but how do I cite? This nice little flow chart up here in the corner kind of walks you through the process of when to cite your information, but also goes through the items that you need. So the first thing is quotation marks. If you're giving a direct quote, you're borrowing something verbatim, you need to put quotation marks around it to indicate that it's not your language. Then you need an in-text citation. So for APA style, if that's what you're using, I know a lot of people use that style, it would be a parenthetical citation in the body of your paper or your project or whatever you're working on. It's going to be the author and the date. You might be using a different citation system, in which case it might be an endnote or a footnote, and that's fine. And then you also need to put the item in your bibliography, your references, or your works cited page, whichever way you're naming it. And that way your in-text citations talk to the bibliography, and people can find out more information about what you're citing. One extra component that you might need is that when you're borrowing the expression from someone that's not language, so it's not wording, but you're borrowing a table or a chart or something like that, as I did on the last slide, you can put a credit line in just below to indicate that I didn't create that flow chart, I borrowed that flow chart, and indicate where you got it from, okay? And then again, if you talk about the item in your running text, if it's a paper, you could go ahead and use in-text citations, and in any case, you would want it in your references list. And then there are lots of reasons to cite your sources. Obviously, you want to avoid the pragmatic things of you don't want to get caught plagiarizing, you don't want to fail an assignment or a course or get expelled. But more importantly, or as importantly, you want readers to be able to track down your sources. You want to be nice to your reader. They'll think more highly of you if you provide the information for them in a neat way. It shows that you've done your homework. It shows that you're knowledgeable about the topic. It also gives you the opportunity to sort of stand on the shoulders of giants and incorporate other research into your work that supports your argument or the direction that you're going in. So it really can build your credibility. It also allows you to be a responsible part of the scholarly conversation. So when you write journal articles, your professors write journal articles, they're talking to other scholars, they're having a conversation. And so you want to be a participant who is responsible within that conversation as you're communicating ideas in your discipline as well. Okay, so that was the quick overview of plagiarism. Let's talk a little bit about the differences between plagiarism and copyright. So plagiarism is really about if you're borrowing information or ideas, you need to give credit where credit is due, okay? It's about academic honesty. You can kind of think of it that way. Copyright is in the law, okay? So we're getting into questions and matters of law. And some of the questions that you'll need to ask when you want to use something from someone else, given a particular situation, we'll talk about when you can and can't use things in a little bit. But one thing when you think about is the item I'm using copyright protected? If it's not, then you don't have to worry about it. Is the use I want to use it for one of the exclusive rights of a copyright holder? If it is, then you'll need to think about, does my use fall under one of the exceptions written into the law? And there are lots of exceptions made for educational activities, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. If it falls under one of the exceptions, then you're okay. If it doesn't, if your use doesn't apply to the exceptions, then you might need to request permission, or you may have to find something else to use. Okay, and actually, to get started then with copyright, I want to talk just about the basis. Where did copyright law come from? It's based in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says, Congress shall have the power to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. So the actual text of copyright law is not in the Constitution, but the basis of it is in the Constitution. And from the text of the law, which is Title 17 of the United States Code, these are the items that can be protected by copyright. These are pretty broad categories, but it's the kind of things you'd expect to see. Literary works, music, drama, movies, lots of the things we use every single day. There are some criteria for eligibility for copyright. It has to be fixed in a tangible medium of expression. And it also has to have some level of originality or creativity to it. So the portrait over there on the side is very creative. I certainly couldn't draw that. The napkin doodle in the middle, slightly less creative, more on my level of drawing. But it is in a tangible medium of expression. It's fixed, even if it is a napkin. And it has some level of creativity. So in terms of its eligibility for copyright, probably okay. A side note is that you do not have to register your work to have it copyright protected, and you don't have to have the symbol on it either. Sometimes people think that that's the case. Just a quick side note. The Constitution says protection for limited times. This is a very, very simplified picture of the duration of copyright. If something's published in the United States before 1923, the copyright has expired and it's in the public domain, which we'll talk about in a bit. If it was published after 1978, then the copyright duration is the entire life of the author plus another 70 years. I'll let you decide if you feel like that's limited time or not. Some people argue that it's a little long. Others might argue that it's not long enough. If it was published between 1923 and 1978, the simple answer is it's complicated. That's because the laws changed a great deal between those years, and so whether something is still copyright protected is a big question. There are ways to figure it out that would take another hour probably, so we won't go into that here, but it has to do with during that time you did have to put the symbol on it, or you did have to register it, or the duration was shorter and you had to renew your copyrights. So it gets complicated at that point. So what are these exclusive rights that copyright holders have? This is simplified text, not straight from the law. The law took the whole page, so I made it simpler. The copyright owner has the right to do these 6 things, or they can authorize someone else to do one or all of these things, including making copies of the original work, creating derivatives. Derivatives are another work based on the original work. So the easy example of this is when Hollywood decides to make a movie based off a novel, they can't just go make the movie. They have to go talk to the author of the novel and get the rights, okay, to make a derivative work. You have the right to distribute copies, publicly perform it, publicly display it, and then there's a special one for sound recordings and transmission. What can't be protected by copyright? You can't copyright protect facts or ideas. Ideas don't have a tangible form. This is a little different than in plagiarism, because if we borrow someone else's ideas, usually we want to credit those. But if they're not in a tangible form in terms of copyright, they can't be protected. It's not protected when it's in your brain, okay? It has to be some expression of it is what copyright protects. Additionally, facts and ideas, if we could copyright those, we'd be in trouble because we'd never be able to create anything new because everything under the sun would be copyright protected, right? So we need that freedom to be able to create new things. Additionally, United States government works are not copyright protected. So most documents made from government agencies are available for use for everyone. That's not true in all countries, and it's not true for individual states in the United States either. So state governments, some of them may be copyright protected, some may not be. So as I was talking about, the US government works are in the public domain for the most part, and other things in the public domain are works with expired copyrights or works wherein the creator waived the copyrights. So public domain, if you've heard that term before and weren't quite sure what it meant, it just means that there are works that are no longer or never were protected by copyright. So speaking of public domain, I'd like to show you now a couple of resources where you can find public domain images that might be useful to you. And these, again, are listed on that images guide that I showed you. So Pixabay is a good site. I used some Pixabay images in this presentation. And you're not going to find a lot of medical images on here, but you will find like decorative things. to add into a presentation. It can be useful for that. So if I needed a stop sign to represent something in my presentation, this is a good place to go. These public domain images, technically you don't even have to attribute these. You don't even have to cite them. I did in my presentation because I didn't want you to think I forgot to cite my sources, okay? So, and you always can. If you're worried your audience might think that too, you can cite them if you'd like. Just a quick warning, the ones at the top are sponsored images. Those are actually from vendors. You'd have to pay for those if you wanted those up in the yellow bar. So that ones can be helpful. Now in terms of more medical health science types of images, the CDC has a public health image library, also known as PHIL. And it has several collections in here that you could browse if something looks interesting to you. Another good, you can also just search it for something. I'm just going to put in MRSA. Oh, my session has expired. Okay, hang on. There we go. And there's lots of images here. Most of these are public domain images, but it's good to double check because not absolutely 100% of them are public domain. So just to give you an example, let's go ahead and select this one. It's kind of strangely beautiful for the scary thing that it is, right? Come down to the information about the image. And at the bottom, it will have copyright restriction information here. And this one is public domain. So we know we're okay to use it. And they actually ask that you, as a matter of courtesy, do cite the image. And there's a photo credit up here. And you could put that in your project for whatever you're doing. Okay? So Pixabay and PHIL, good sources of public domain images. All right. So let's talk about some of the limitations on the exclusive rights of copyright holders. Again, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. If you have specific questions, just let me know and we can talk about those later. One of the limitations is one that's very familiar that we all use all the time, even if we don't know that we use it, is that there is a limitation for performances and displays in face-to-face teaching, particularly in nonprofit educational institutions. So most of us are engaged in the activity of education, often face-to-face teaching. This is a nonprofit educational institution. If we didn't have this exception in the copyright law, we wouldn't be able to do the things that we think of as education every day. So playing a video in the classroom, reading from a text in the classroom. In another class, you might perform a play in a classroom or something like that. This really is sort of the heart and soul of what we do in the classroom. So it's a good thing we have this exception. There's another exception for performances and displays in distance learning or online learning. It is not quite as broad as the exception for face-to-face teaching. There are some limitations. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of that today, but a few tips to think about there is that a few things to do to sort of make sure you're staying in a happy place in terms of copyright is to limit the access online to registered students only in a password-protected system, so something like Blackboard takes care of that. Only registered students are going to be able to have access to the course. It is password protected. And to display the items or put them available only for the duration of the course or the duration of the activity for which you need them for. Again, if you have questions about this, we could talk about this more. This part of the law is much more detailed than the previous exception. There's another exception. So if the first two didn't apply to you, which honestly those probably would take care of a lot of your needs, there's also the fair use exception. And that gives you exceptions for very specific situations, including education, research, news reporting, criticism, and commentary. And the way to determine if something is a fair use is to, you have to consider 4 factors. And this is where, when I reference the KU guide, they have links to 4-factor checklists that are useful. I'm going to walk through the criteria, but you can find out more about them there. You have to consider all 4 factors. The first factor is the purpose of the use. So what do you want to do with the copyrighted work? And thinking about, is it more nonprofit, is it more educational, or is it leaning toward the side of commercial activity? You're going to be profiting from the use. These are just, you have to kind of balance these factors out. These are all listed on those checklists to kind of help you determine if this particular factor favors fair use or opposes fair use. I particularly like the parity one down here because that exception is what allows us to have things like SNL or Funny or Die, things like that. That's the fair use exception they're using to make fun of things. You also have to consider the nature of the work itself. So is the copyrighted item very factual and nonfiction, or is it highly creative? If it's highly creative, that's less likely to be fair use. So something like a painting or music and that nature. The third criteria is the amount and substantiality used. So how much of the original are you using related to the whole? Are you using a very small part of the actual source? If so, that's a good thing. But you also have to consider how important that piece is to the work itself. There was a court case some decades ago when President Ford wrote a memoir about, in his book he talked about why he pardoned President Nixon. A reviewer of the book put that part of the book in the news article and was sued for copyright infringement, and the reviewer lost because the most important information that people wanted to find out about from President Ford's book was why he pardoned Nixon and what his rationale was for that. So it was a small part of the book, but it was the heart of the matter. Okay, so that's something to think about. And then you have to consider the effect upon the market. So how is it going to affect sales of the copyrighted item? If it's no significant effect, you're only making a couple copies, that can be okay. If not, then you need to sort of think about, there's lots of things that come into here like licensing. Is there an easy way to get a licensed copy of it and that kind of thing? For students in the room, you guys often don't have to worry about fair use at all. If you're just doing activities for the classroom, for an assignment, often professors too, if you're doing it in the classroom, face-to-face room, you have the exception for educational activities and you're in pretty good shape there. The trick would be is when you want to go outside of that, like you're going to a conference or you want to publish an article or something like that. Okay, so some places to go that are good places to go for copyrighted information that's okay to use in the educational setting is some of the resources we have through Dyke's Library. Again, these are on the image guide that I showed you at the beginning. I'm going to name a couple. Access Medicine is a good place to go. It has lots of good images, lots of good videos. Up to Date does as well. And then Clinical Key is one I'm going to show you here. And once I've searched, I can change my source type to just images and see what I have. And these resources are nice too because they actually have little controls where you can print it or email it or download it directly into a PowerPoint slide, which makes your life really easy. And these are okay to use if you were doing a homework assignment for a class or needed to give a presentation in the class. It's fine to use. We license these, we pay for these resources, so it's fine to use in that context. What you wouldn't want to do is use this in a poster you were then going to take to present at a conference or put it in a journal that you're publishing elsewhere because these are copyright protected. In that case, you would need permission for these. But great resources for classroom activities. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about, another place to get images, is Creative Commons. Yeah, question? Sure, yeah.
Okay, this copyright. Okay, could I use it and cite it without permission?
In what context?
I mean, presentation or article or...
It would depend upon the exact situation that you want to use it in. So if you were using it for presentation you're giving in the classroom, either to students or you're the student and giving it in class, that would be fine. But if you're taking it out of that context, that's where you could get into some issues since it's copyright protected. You have to look at the exact situation.
Even if I cite it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So when you're in the classroom, as long as you're citing your sources in that context, you're giving credit, you're not plagiarizing, you're in pretty good shape. It's when you step out of that educational context because you might be infringing on those exclusive rights of the copyright holder. Okay? And that's where, if you were worried about that, you might want, if you could get a hold of a public domain image, then it wouldn't matter, right? Another option for you, though, might be a Creative Commons image. How many of you use Creative Commons? Know what it is? The librarian's in the room. Okay, great. All right, so Creative Commons is another great way to find not just images, but all kinds of information. CreativeCommons.org is a website that allows copyright holders to give away some of their rights, to let people use their stuff that would normally infringe upon those copyright protections, but they're saying, hey, I want people to have access to this. And this is what their licenses offer. So their symbol, very similar to the copyright symbol, but it's Creative Commons. And their tagline is some rights reserved rather than all rights reserved. They have different licenses at their website that allow people to do different things. You can assign these to your work, or if you're looking at some images and trying to figure out how can I use these, you can go to their website and look at the license and find out what exactly you can or can't do with the work that you're looking at. The components of their licenses are over here. The first one is the by symbol, which has a little person there, which just means you have to give attribution. If you use this, you have to cite where it's from. Okay, so that's basic plagiarism stuff. We all know how to cite sources, no big deal. This is non-commercial. That means a work with that mark on it can only be used for non-commercial purposes. So education, non-commercial. That's good shape. Share alike means that this person has shared their work. If you incorporate their work into a new work, then you also have to share your new work. Okay, so it's kind of like pay it forward. All right, I shared with you, you share with other people. This kind of sounds like those rules we got when we were kids, you know. And then no derivatives is the equal sign. That means you can use this work as it is, but you can't create something new from it. So if this is an image, you can't go in and Photoshop some extra things in there. You need to just use it as it is. And then they also have a public domain dedication mark that allows copyright holders to waive all of their copyrights and essentially deposit their work into the public domain where anyone can use it in any way they like. So I'll show you a couple of places where you can find some, let's see, let's go to this one. Creative Commons licensed images. This is the HEAL collection from University of Utah, or the Health Education Assets Library. And I'm just going to jump in here. You can browse any of the collections. But if we go and look at one of the images, down below, under the rights information, it has a Creative Commons link. If I click this link, it will open the license. Actually, I'll just do it. It'll open the license that tells us exactly what we can do with this image. And so it's attribution. We have to cite it. We can use it for non-commercial purposes, and we can't make any derivatives of it. Okay? So you'll see different combinations of those. And if you go to the Creative Commons website, that can help you decipher how you can or can't use the image. And I'm always available for questions, too. You can also search for Creative Commons on Flickr. Again, you might not find really good medical images here, but I'll put in something more general. Now, my first results here are everyone's photos. Many of these photos would be copyright protected, but if I come over here to the license area, and there's different things you can choose, but I'm just going to choose all Creative Commons. So I only want to look at photos that have been licensed through Creative Commons. And then you can look and see if there's anything that looks useful. So here's a demonstration of an exercise. That might be useful. And then down here below the photo, it provides the Creative Commons information. That's what these symbols are. And again, it will link out to the license telling you what you can and can't do with the image. When you're on these kinds of websites, do always make sure that you actually go to the page the image is on and get that exact information. I wouldn't rely on it from the search results and just say, oh, well, I put it on Creative Commons, and so I can just right-click here and grab this quick and copy it. Go ahead and look and make sure, because if it's Creative Commons, you need to see what you can and can't do, because there's different licenses. And, you know, it might not filter correctly or something, so just to be sure. Another place you can go is you can search this on Google too. And I'm going to search, let's see. I'm just going to search for anything at the moment, because what I want is this gear symbol over here. So I can go to the advanced search. And in the advanced search, there's some usage rights area down here. It doesn't specifically say Creative Commons, but it has some options. So I want something that's free to use and share. And I'm going to search that. And then I'm going to switch over to images too. Again, don't rely on these results. Go in and look at the image itself. So if we liked this first one, we could go ahead and visit the page. And turns out it's from Wikipedia. It's probably public domain. But you can, come to the page and check and see, and then you'll know if it is actually something public domain or it is actually something Creative Commons. Okay. That's all I've got. So I think I'll let Sunny go if you want to, and then maybe questions at the end. I think.
Yes, please. Hello all, I'm Sunny Painter. I work with the Teaching and Learning Technologies Department. And first I want to say Heather did a great job. I don't even know what I'm going to be talking about because I was just learning so much from her. So I'll try to get my stuff ready here. What I'm going to be talking about specifically is a product called Safeassign, which is a tool within Blackboard. This is mainly for instructors' use, and it's a tool that compares a submitted work to a database of work. So it can detect any kind of plagiarism it might be able to find throughout its own database. The good thing about this product is since we have Blackboard, it is free for us. We don't have any additional cost for us, and it's in Blackboard. With this tool, you can submit Word documents or PDFs. It'll be able to check those fairly easily. It does take a little time to process when you make a submission into this. I submitted something yesterday, and it was taking over an hour to actually get the results back. So if you're going to be using this tool as an instructor or as a student that submits their work and gets the feedback back, it may take a little time for it to run against the databases it compares against. And it also does have a file size. It has a 10 megabyte file size, so if you're uploading a very large like PowerPoint or something like that, it's not going to accept it. So this is mainly for any kind of essays, reports, large project papers that you want to submit to the tool. The first thing we need to do, I'm going to give a short demo on how to use it and then look over the actual report that it gives here in a little bit. But I want to give you some ideas before you get started with Safeassign, especially as an instructor, what things you need to consider. Since it is a tool that looks for plagiarism, you need to make sure that you consider what you're going to do with those results. How are you going to assess the student differently if you find a lot of plagiarism within their results? How are you going to quantify that number? And the handout that was just distributed back to you on the back page, they talk about some of the numbers that come through it, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But you really need to consider what you're going to do with that information once you get it, because right now either you're doing your own plagiarism on your own and doing some Google checking yourself to see if it's plagiarized or not, and that's a lot of work. So this is going to help eliminate that kind of work. And there are other tools out there. There's some free online ones out there, but again, you're not quite sure what kind of databases it's comparing against. And there's other professional ones like Turnitin, that's another one, but there's a cost associated with that. The thing that you need to know also is when you're an instructor and it's comparing against databases, what kind of information it's comparing against too. There is, I didn't have it written down here. There is, on the site that I have, it has a list of all that it compares to. It obviously goes through a lot of the most popular websites, Wikipedia, a lot of news organizations, but it also goes through some, like a Quest Pro database for a lot of journal articles out there to compare against. Now, it doesn't have the extensive medical journal libraries that it compares against, which a lot of our students are going to be referencing. So it's not going to catch everything, but it should give us a good idea if any of this information is just coming from the general public area. The other thing that you want to consider when you do Safeassign is this tool has to be set up before students make submissions. So you can't have an assignment and everybody's putting in submissions and you're like, oh, I want to go ahead and run this tool on all the papers. It doesn't work proactively. It has to be done when the student actually makes a submission, then it actually pushes it against the database to make the comparison. So if you're going to do it, make sure you know you're going to do it and you've considered the consequences on how you're going to assess it, what you're going to do with the information once you make that check box to run the report. So when you set up Safeassign, I've got this one short URL that if anything you go with and you need from me, if you write that down, that's going to give you everything you need to know on how to set up Safeassign. I'm going to give a little demo right here in just a minute on how to do it. It's super easy to set up, but the thing is you also have to consider how you want to use the tool. You can use it the very basic way where a report is submitted and it's going to get compared, and you're going to use that in you're going to use that report when you're doing the grading of that. You're going to use the Safeassign report when you're going to do the grading of the submission. So there's only one time, one submission, one report. You can also have the option of setting it up so that a student can submit multiple drafts. They can actually run their own, see the Safeassign report for their own work, so they can compare it and make changes to their drafts, and then you're only concerned about just grading the final one, not the drafts before. And then you also have the option of grading multiple drafts, and they can use Safeassign during those multiple drafts, and then finally grading the final one. So you're going to grade both the drafts and the final. So depending on which one of those ways you want to use the tool, there's different ways to set those up. And if you go to that site, I have a long little blog post that I wrote on how to set that up that way. All right? So we're going to go into Blackboard. And we're going to show you how to set up Safeassign. So I'm going to go to my course. And if you notice, I've set up some already with Safeassign, and all they are an assignment option. So if we want to do Safeassign, we have to have an assignment. So we go to Assessments, Assignment. We do exactly what we do for any other assignment. Give it a name, give it any kind of instructions, any attachments, a due date, has to give it points, got the little star beside it. Then we just go into submission details, and this is where we do our check-in. So we have individual, group, and portfolio, how many times you want them to submit it, and then we have our plagiarism tools. All you have to do is check the very first one so it runs the Safeassign tool against it. Now we also have a couple other options. We can allow students to actually see the same originality report that you're going to get. And then we also have the exclude submissions from institutional and global reference databases. So when we talk about what it's going to check papers against, there is the websites, the digital journal articles it checks against, but also has two other databases it checks against. We have the institutional database. The institutional database is the one where all the papers from KU Med are submitted, and we have our own little database of everybody who submits their stuff, so you can compare students who've gone here with students who've gone here. Okay, that's the institutional database. That does not go to the global one. The global database is all students and instructors' papers that submitted to that database. Now, that global database is global, but that's with like a volunteer check-in. When a student submits their work, they have a little checkbox say, hey, do you want to submit this out there so that your work is in this global database so no one else can use your work? They have that option. It's not up to the instructor or to us here in TLT to make that decision. The student has to make a decision if they want to make their paper part of the global database. There's a reason why you as an instructor setting this up, why you will or will not want to check it. The main reason is if you're doing multiple drafts and you're grading those multiple drafts, you don't want to put them in the databases because you don't want the next drafts to be compared against it or the final to be compared against those initial drafts. You only check that for the final submission. So then it goes into the databases. All right? Any questions about that? So the way you set it up, make an assignment, go in submission details, and click the first box. Booyah. That's as easy as it gets. I'm telling you, I don't know how. That's a pretty easy task right there, and hit submit. And now it's a Safeassign assignment. Yes, ma'am.
So then as a student, we can only see the report if the professor is not to.
That is correct. So if you know an instructor is going to be using Safeassign to assess part of your paper for plagiarism, you can actually request and say, hey, would it be possible that we could see that same document? Or ask them to say, is there a way that we can run it ourselves? And if the instructor needs to set it up, I have instructions on that site that says how do you set it up so that you can sit in multiple drafts, get reports back, and like, ooh, there it shows that I've copied 50% of my paper. I better do some modifications to this. I better, cite and rewrite like I'm supposed to, right? And so you can get the report and make the changes, and then the instructor would only have to be worried about the final draft, okay? So you can help your instructor be educated about this, if you'd like. So there we go. So someone goes and submit their paper, and you're like, oh, what's next? What do I do with the report or the information I get back? So then we're going to look at that, where those are located. So there's a couple places where you can access that information. You can access it. Most instructors go to the Grade Center and are like, okay, I'm going to check out the student's work here. They're going to grade it. So we're going to look at one that was 100% copied from Mr. Doug Adams here. And I just found a journal article and I just submitted it to it. Okay? And so this is directly a digital copy of something. And it didn't look like this one got ran on it. I'll have to check why that didn't run. So it would be in this area. There's a little box that says Safeassign Report. You click it. You can see the report. The other place that you can find Safeassign reports are under the course tools, and there's a Safeassign option. And then we have our Safeassign items. Those are assignments you set up. Then we have direct submit, and I'll talk about that here in just a moment. Safeassign assignments are all the assignments that have been submitted as Safeassign assignments. So we would have this one, so we could go and look at both of those, and then we'd have information on the what the percentage was on match, and get to see the detailed report. And this is where it'd be displayed if you go in the Safeassign option here. But let's look at an actual submission. So I'll take in the direct submit. What did I take? I took one of my research proposals in one of my graduate classes. I'm like, hey, I'm going to submit it, see how well I did. Look at this, 32% matching. Oh my gosh, is that horrible? Well, there's some guidelines on the back of that sheet of percentages. And we'll look at it so you get an idea better of what 32% might mean. That's not bad. It actually catches a lot of things, like table of contents. I don't know how many papers out there have the word table of contents in it. There's obviously a few of them out there, right? So it does find a lot of these things that are common terms throughout. The ones we're worried about are the ones that are larger possible instances of plagiarism. In this screen, again, this is detailed on that paper, what these pieces are about. It highlights things that it finds a match with. It gives it sites of these places of where it finds potential matches. We'll find something that looks a little shady. Obviously, citations on it, that's not going to be something we're concerned about. Those are pretty short. Oh, come on, Sonny, you probably copied more. Oh, here we go. This is like 2 sentences or a whole sentence right here. So we look at this and say, did Sonny here copy this word for word? So if you click on this actual citation, it says, oh, it's an 83% match. So it compares mine with the actual item that it's found to match it. It actually gives you a source. You can click and see that. And you can see it looks like Sonny might have needed to reword this a little bit better. This must have been a draft, and he was going to go back and paraphrase it later. I'm sure he was. He's a great student. He wouldn't do these kind of things. But it would have been good as me as a student be able to get this report to say, oh, I forgot to paraphrase that, didn't I? And you'll see, like, it's only highlighted a few things in here so far. And then where is it getting the most from? The works cited, which makes sense. Okay, so the one thing that an instructor needs to do, and a student, if you're looking at these reports, is like, this is actually a fairly good paper. We maybe saw one instance of something might have been plagiarized, not paraphrased well, but the majority of the things that find matches are common terms and works cited areas. Okay, so if you're going to use this as a tool, make sure you look at that report before you just start giving grades based on the number it gives back. You know, he says, oh, 32%, you copied 32% of your paper somewhere else. I think that's bad news. I'm going to give you, minus 10% of your grade. Okay, so don't go ahead and do that. Really look at the report when it gives back to you and make the decisions then. That goes back to the part, really think about how you want to assess it and how you're going to put that like in a grading rubric on if you find plagiarism, how you're going to handle it. Okay, are you going to give them an opportunity to rework it, or are you going to say, if I find 3 cases, you're going to be deducted, so many points on this assignment? Well, then you're having your students submit work without the citations. Separately, I guess if you wanted to do it, I don't know as an instructor you want that. As an instructor, I would just want the final product, and I grade the final product, and then I'm going to run the report and see this, and then I have to make a determination after reading this. Are the instances it outlines, are they real plagiarism or not?
I have a similar question. For example, is there any way that you set up the program to see, like, for example, large sentences only, like 2 or 3 sentences together, something like that?
No, it finds everything through it. Now, you can go through here and unhighlight certain things in here. You can actually say, okay, I looked at this one and this one right here. We know these are all short ones. And say, I'm not really worried about these because these are titles, and you can hit resubmit. And it'll do another report and give it a little bit less. But my time's valuable to me as an instructor, and I just noticed that as like, hey, I don't need to worry about, I move on to the sections that I should be aware of. But it will do some of those things for you. Yes?
So this is great, thanks for clarifying. There are also instances where we're not doing this part of the course, say, and as faculty, whether it's for our own work or for things like student that's not really associated with the course, something like research or something like that. What would you recommend for using this? Would you create a course shell, or?
So if you're using this for your class, you want your students to just work on something, there's not an actual direct student submission place. There is for instructors. Unfortunately, not for students. So for an instructor and students need it to submit an assignment, but you don't really going to use that, you can actually set up an assignment that has 0 points and just let them run it and let them see it. Check that box so they can go back and see it themselves. For the instructor, if you're writing a journal article that you want to submit, you want to double check it, there's a tool for that. So it's under Safeassign, and we talked about the Safeassign items. Those are the graded ones. The direct submit is the one that I submitted my paper to too. So you're directly submitting to it, so it gives you a report back. You click submit a paper. You choose a file. Let's see what's on this computer. Anything interesting? Oh, those are all PNG files. There's ain't nothing there. But anyways, you would find, maybe in the documents. Oh yeah, we'll use this one. We'll use that one. You can submit a PowerPoint to it. You can copy and paste text into it. You want to submit as a draft. So what it does there is doesn't actually take your paper and submit it to the institutional. It's just running the service against your paper so you can check for it. And you hit submit, and then after a while, if it runs it doesn't give you kind of email notifications or anything like that. You just have to go back and check to see if it's actually gone through and done the report. And then you would see it. You go direct submit, and you'll see it in your list here, and it will show your Safeassign. Check, we've done it, and how close you are to it. Here's one I did that was directly copied from Wikipedia. And you can say, oh, look, it found that it's directly copied from Wikipedia. Congratulations, you can copy and paste. Okay?
And so the colors there.
Those colors help identify the different places it could have been pulled from. So this one, actually, there's another place out there that shows where this document could have been copied from. So it's actually got a couple of resources that have that same thing, that same title. And then this one's actually Wikipedia. and this other one is another place, I think Wollongong. I know the people from there. I used to work for a supplemental instruction program, so. So that's the tool there. Any other questions regarding the Safeassign tool? It's fairly easy. If you have any additional questions, you ask me. Going back to the presentation here, definitely if you go to this little URL here, it gives you the blog write-up on how to actually set it up in Blackboard so you can assign it or you can assess it the way you want to do it. And I think I already did that part. Anybody have any questions for Heather?
Related to in the past, the library stuff, we had perhaps an article that we wanted to show in class.
Mm-hmm.
Have what were called reserve items.
Yeah.
Can you clarify for me, like, how is that transition, or is there new rules that we can?
I may even have Julie and Heather jump in on me with this one. Yeah, so the e-reserve system that the library used to have, we don't have that system anymore because, I don't know, Heather, if you want to jump in, it was really expensive, I believe. And so we can help you with that. If you have a particular instance, what you will need to do is determine what kind of use it is and if it's an article that you're using semester after semester, in which case you might need to get permission for that or to pay a fee for it. You would then post it in Blackboard yourself, and we would need to kind of work through the department as well for getting any fees assessed for that, I think. I don't know, Heather, if you want to jump in.
So we're following KU main campus, they've been in place for about 10 years. And essentially they're relying upon the firewall of Blackboard and the elements of fair use that Heather described to reuse content in your class. So most content is going to come from text libraries resources. So number one, try and find resources that are in our collection. If you are using a resource that is interlibrary loaned or from an external source, you can see if we have in our collection first, and then you're clear. You don't have to do it.
Yeah, and just as a quick recommendation, if it is in our collection, the best practice is to link to it. The vendors all prefer linking rather than the actual PDF because it's so easy to copy. But yeah, if it's in our collection, then you're fine. Yeah.
And then if you have something that you're using, go ahead and use it once in your class, and you're going to claim fair use for it the first time. If you use it a subsequent semester, then it's time to check with the librarian or to think about replacing a source, or you might need to have your department pay in the future to use it. We did a workshop on this, Julie did, last August, but we'd be happy to do on presentations or sit down with faculty and do.
Sure.
Good question, thank you.
Yeah.
I actually encourage students to copy the Blackboard, PowerPoint, handouts and whatnot onto a little stick drive
Mhm.
so that they can have all of that information once they graduated. So now I've gone outside of the face-to-face. I mean, I suppose they could do that anyway, but I actually tell them. You should do this so that
Yeah.
when they graduate, they have all this.
Right. I mean, certainly they can have a copy for personal use. That's allowed. And this gets into an area where I know less about. It's the TEACH Act, which gets really complicated. There's a lot of technical requirements for it. But there's some question as to whether, once the students have downloaded it for personal use, how can we really control that anyway? So I would say do your part on what you're putting up there to begin with, and if you have specific questions, let us know and we can look at it further. So it's hard to answer general questions about copyright because it always depends upon the specific use and exactly what's happening. Yeah.
Another question about citation.
Uh-huh.
As far as I know, for example, there is a paragraph that I want to paraphrase I have to go to the original citation. For example, the original citation from this paragraph
Mm-hmm.
back to the 1925 and this paragraph from the job from published research in 2010. As far as I know, I should cite the original one. But some people said, no, you should cite previous one, because if you go back to every single sentence, and reference words would exceed it,
Well, I think it's probably a judgment call, honestly, if Julie or Heather, you want to jump in at any point, do. The reason you would want to go back to the original is to probably verify the information, because if it's not a direct quote in the secondary source, then you're relying on that person to have quoted it accurately and to have not taken anything out of context. And so that would be the reason to track it back to the very original source, and then you would cite directly from that. But I think there is a judgment call, because you're right. I mean, and especially if it's just paraphrased, you can't cite everything under the sun, especially journal articles where they're building and building and building upon a particular topic in a discipline for years at a time. And so.
I think there is a lot of particularities, but for example, you are publishing, so you published in a journal, and then you are publishing another paper in another journal.
Mm-hmm.
And this, for example, some part of the methods is the same, for that you have different results, or you are looking different variables, but like the methods is kind of similar.
Mm-hmm.
And I have seen a couple of papers that they repeat kind of the methods.
Mm-hmm.
And so in different papers, like in different journals.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about what? It's fine or it's not?
It's a good question. I would look at my author agreements that you signed when, especially if you transferred your copyright to the publisher that owns the journal. Look at your agreements there to see, because they probably have restrictions on what you can and can't do with the journal once it's published, or the article once it's published. And then, yeah, I mean, I think it's weird. I've seen it before where people appear to have copied and pasted the exact same. I think I would be concerned about doing that myself. I mean, it might be similar, but this is probably a little bit beyond my expertise area, but as personally, I think I would probably want to paraphrase it, rework it a little bit, or something at least. But yeah, if you're researching in the same subject area, you're probably going to have some similarities, or if you're basing additional research that you've done in that area. So it's a good question.
So if you don't put the exclude button on Safeassign assignments, are they automatically submitted to the institutional?
Yes, everything that you submit goes to an institutional database. The student has the option of submitting something to the global database.
Okay. And if you don't put Safeassign on the assignment itself and you're just submitting a paper, does that go into the database? Or
No. Only thing that goes into our institutional Safeassign database are ones that have actually been checked to go to Safeassign. All of the papers that we've done so far, they're in the beautiful database of Blackboard somewhere. We can find it if we need to, but they're not going to be specifically in the institutional Safeassign database to compare other papers to.
I just had an additional thought about your question. It is possible to plagiarize yourself, too. People don't always think about that, but you can self-plagiarize. So if you're citing a previous article of your own, just cite it the way you would anyone else's article that you're including, and you get to promote your other work at the same time. So something else to keep in mind. Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's why it's important, if you're going to use it for assessment of a paper, that you look over the items that it highlights, because it's going to highlight, like I said, citations and titles, and very generic terms that we use all the time is, yeah, it's a computer. It doesn't know that it's a common use term. It says, hey, this article out here is the same as the paper you submitted. I'm going to highlight for you and let you make the decision. It is all up to the instructor to make the decision whether it's actually been plagiarized or not. Yeah, if you get a report back and it has 50% as it found 50% of the items matching other sources out there, That should give you cause concern because that means a lot of things out there. And then I would go in and look at the length of the ones that are left. And like I said, on the back of that page that's been handed out, there's some guidelines. You know, if it's pretty much anything under 40%, you're pretty good. You might have one or two items in there that needs attention, but you're fairly good. Anything over 40, you should really be checking out what's been copied and pasted. Or they wrote it so well that it looks so much like Wikipedia's, you know what I mean? Or maybe they're the original author of Wikipedia and they reused it. All right, well, thank you everybody for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
We appreciate your attendance.